In our app, we've started to build our sign-in component. Now, up to this point, we don't really have the functionality because we need to store this somewhere. We need to store it in a database, and Ihua is going to go over that in the next video. But this Firebase section is very important because it mimics a real-life scenario. You see, most of the time, when you're working with something like Firebase, you have to realize that developers like myself or Ihua aren't going to memorize the entire Firebase library because this is always evolving. This is always changing. So for example, if I Google Firebase and go to their docs, their documentation, over the next couple of videos, we're going to see some of the implementation that Ihua is going to show that is actually part of the documentation. So if we click on Get Started for the Web, this documentation is going to explain pretty well how we can implement what we're about to implement. For example, if we go to Authentication and we click over here, Web, and in our case, let's say Google Sign-In, it's going to have some pretty nice documentation of how we can add this feature to our app. And most likely, when you're building something on your own like this, or for a company, you're going to go through these documentation. You're not going to memorize what we're going to teach you in these videos in your head because it's impossible. There's so many tools out there. The key thing here to remember is that professional developers, what they do is they understand that, hey, I'm going to use Firebase for, let's say, storage and authentication. And they're able to go to the documentation, read things, and understand that, hey, when we install, npm install Firebase as a package, well, these are the documentations that I can use to set up Firebase. And you'll see that in our code, we're going to do some of the things that you'll see in the documentation, such as this. So if over the next couple of videos, things get overwhelming and you're thinking to yourself, wow, Ihua is just amazing. Andre is just amazing. They know Firebase inside and out. Keep in mind that no developer memorizes a library like Firebase. What we do is we study the documentation and then we implement it into our code. So yes, we record these videos and it looks like everything is perfect, but it involves us going back and forth with the documentation, trying out things step by step. And this is something that often isn't covered in tutorials. When we work with libraries like this, documentation is your friend. Again, before we get started, remember, if this next section seems overwhelming, seems extra complicated, you always have the documentation to go to read up more. All right, hopefully I didn't scare you too much. Let's get started.